our Gemara discusses the complaints that Sheva and Zevulun had regarding their portion in the land of Israel, and the assurance that Hashem gives them that, don't worry, even though you don't have fields and things, you have something even greater, and that is that you have the Chilazon. And you can produce techeles, the dye you needed for tzitzis and other things, big day kahuna, the Kohen's garments had techeles in them. You have that ability to produce that because you have the commodity of having the chilazon in your midst. Now, this, of course, as any Gemara that talks about the chilazon, opens up the question as to the identity of the chilazon and whether any proof can be brought regarding that question from this Gemara. There is a raging debate currently in the world for the last couple of decades really, but regarding whether the Murex trunculus snail is in fact the chilazon, and many believe that it is, and they therefore dye some of the strings of the tzitzis in that color, and using that special dye, and then there are those who disagree, hold that it's not, or even if they accept that it is, but still there's a big discussion and a great amount of literature. But I want to just try to discuss how our Gemara impacts that discussion. Is there any proof from this Gemara one way or another that's brought? And we'll have a brief discussion about that. So let's just recap again. The Gemara says that Zevulun complained regarding their land. They said, "You've given my brothers fields and vineyards, and I just have seas, yamim unaharos, I have seas and rivers." So Amar Lo, so Hashem says, "Kulan trichin lecha alidei chilazon." Everybody needs you because you have the chilazon. Shenemar amim har yikro, as it says that the nations, meaning the other tribes, will come to the mountain to visit, to be able to get their chilazon, their techeles dye. Usfunei temunei chol, and it says that there are treasures buried in the sand. And the Gemara quotes Rabbi Yosef, who says that sfunei, the treasures, refers to the chilazon, and after that, the Gemara goes on and it says that Zevulun then asks, "Mi modieni alzos?" Who's going to tell me? And the response was, "Amar lo shamis b'chuz ifchetzedek." It quotes the rest of the pasuk that don't worry, there they will bring righteous offerings. Siman zeh yehelecha. You'll have this sign, this symbol. Anybody who takes from you without damim, even without paying for it, their business will not be successful. So the question, Mibo Dieni Alzos, who's going to tell me about this? Rashi says, Lasis li damim, who says that they're going to let me know, they're going to pay for it, and the answer was no, anybody who takes it without paying for it won't see success from that, and that's the meaning of the pasuk, Sham yizbechu tzedek, they're going to bring righteous offerings that, just like an offering cannot be from something that's stolen, they also won't steal these dyes, won't steal the chilazon, and won't and so you will still be able to benefit from having this in your midst. That's how Rashi explains the Gemara. Now the Maharsha finds this pshat difficult. He says Rashi says that the concern was that people might take it without paying for it. Rashi says it's dochak to say that people would steal without just take from Zevulun's land without paying for it. So rather, what was his concern? His concern was that Shema Yavo Lischor Bekala Ilan B'Makom Tcheles. They might come and sell Kala Ilan instead of Tcheles. What's Kala Ilan? So Kala Ilan, we have a Gemara in Bava Metzia. The Gemara says in Bava Metzia that the Gemara asks, why does it say Ani Hashem? Why does it mention Yetzias Mitzrayim, the exodus from Egypt, in the context of the mitzvah of tcheles. So at the end of Parshat Shlach, the third paragraph of Shema, so it says, you should you should put on the corners, you should put tcheles. Uri Samoso, you'll see it, you'll remember all the mitzvos. And then it mentions Yitzias Mitzrayim. It says, Lamantis Kribas Ani Hashem Elokei Moshe Hotzei Eschem Me'eretz Mitzrayim. I am Hashem who took you out of Mitzrayim, took you out of Egypt. So the Gemara asks, what's the connection? Why does it mention Yitzias Mitzrayim in the context of Tcheles? Says the Gemara that the message of the Torah is that just as I, Hashem, was able to determine who was a Bechor. You can have a woman in Egypt who was, had relations with 10 different men over the course of a few days or a few weeks or a few months, and then, or actually really consistently over a number of years, and she could have 10 children. And I could know if everyone's a Bechor, meaning I would know who the father is, and I would know, Hashem says, which one's a firstborn, because all the firstborns died, even though they were not firstborn to the mother. As long as they were firstborn to the father, I would be able to determine that if who was the firstborn and who wasn't. So just like I can determine and distinguish between those, so too when it comes to Techeles, I can distinguish between, says the Gemara, I can distinguish between Mishen Tola Kala Ilan Bevigdo Va'Omer Tchelasu. Somebody who puts Kala Ilan on their beged and claims that it is Techeles. So a person might, there's a question in that Gemara if it means that they then go and sell it, or just for themselves, they're fakers, and they're not really wearing Techeles, they're wearing Kala Ilan. What is Kala Ilan? So it's basically accepted already from the times of the Rishonim, maybe earlier, that Kala Ilan is indigo, produced from indigo plant or another species, I think, but is the color indigo, and it can be produced from the indigo plant, and instead of taking Tcheles from the Chilazon, which is where it needs to come from, you could take that color, you could produce it from indigo plant, but it's a fake, and so Hashem says, I'll know the difference. That's the Gemara in Bava Metzia. So says the Maharsha by us that was Zevulun's concern. Mimo di'ingi, how am I going to know? Meaning, how do I know that people won't start? How am I going to benefit from my chilazon, my tcheles business, if there's kala ilan and people can fake it? So that's why Hashem says, no, don't worry. Sham yizbechu zivchei tzedek. No, they'll bring righteous offerings. That it's aser. They're not going to steal from you by using kala ilan, by using indigo plant. And then says the Maharsha, when the Gemara then goes on and it says that the promise is Kol hanotel mimcha below damim. Anybody who takes from you without damim won't benefit from it. He says maybe it's not like Rashi that it means like we might have thought damim as in money, but damim can mean blood. Blood. Whoever takes from you without blood, meaning whoever tries to produce techeles without the blood of the chilazon, but rather from the kali ilan, from the indigo plant, they're not going to see any success in that business. They're fraudsters and they're not going to be successful, and you don't have to be worried about that. And that was Zevulun's concern, and that was the assurance. The concern was people would be using kala ilan and take away his business, and the assurance was that they won't. They'll be righteous, and anybody who does not use damim, anybody who doesn't use the blood of the chilazon, but rather uses the indigo plant, will not see success. That's how the Maharsha learns our Gemara. Now this point about the similarity between kala ilan, between indigo plant, and the tcheles, which we see they must have been at least very similar, that you could fake it. So that's important to the modern day discussion about what is the identity of the Chilazon and the Tcheles. There's another very important Gemara, which is a Gemara in Menachos. And the Gemara basically says that there's a bedika. There is a experiment that one can do to distinguish between kala ilan, indigo, and and the Chilazon and Tcheles. There's a experiment one can do. You soak it in water for whatever, and there's a way to identify whether it's Kala Ilan or whether or not. I think you soak it for like 40 days, and the Tcheles won't fade, but the Kala Ilan, the indigo, would fade. That's the experiment. Now, the implication of that is that these are basically indistinguishable otherwise. You need to do this experiment. You can't. The naked eye cannot determine the difference between these two things: the dye produced from indigo plant, the indigo dye, versus the color of the Tcheles. Now that seems to back up the claim that the Tcheles is in fact the Murex trunculus snail, because actually the color produced, the dye produced from the Murex trunculus is not only very similar to indigo, but it is identical to indigo. It has the exact same chemical makeup as indigo and from the plant. And so they're identical to the eye. They have the exact same chemical makeup, and therefore it makes a lot of sense that one could fraud people using indigo, using the plant, number one, and number two, that you can't, there's no way to distinguish the difference except for through a chemical experiment. Now you'll ask, well, if they're chemically identical, so how could this experiment work? So that the scientists explain, those who are involved in this, that let me just read the way that it's said. So this article, I don't have the author here, quotes from Professor Elsner, an expert on dyeing textiles. The professor stated that despite the fact that the coloring agents of the dyes are identical, there are differences in the makeup of the accompanying substances. So the coloring agent of the dye is identical, but there's other substances there that are different, and that will impact the ability, the fastness of the dye, whether it will hold or not when it's soaked in water for an extended period of time. So that's one piece of evidence that it makes sense that this is, in fact, that the Murex trunculus is, in fact, the Chilazon. Additionally, we know that Murex trunculus was being used to dye things in those days. That's clear from archaeological evidence. Now, if that's true, then, and if it wasn't the Chilazon, then one would think that Chazal, the sages, would have also identified that as a fraud. Don't use indigo, don't use Kala Ilan, and don't use, and beware of those who use the Murex trunculus snail, because it's also not. If, in fact, it wasn't, then they would have warned us against that, because it's also it's the same, apparently. So that's a very strong indicator that actually that is the correct identification of the Chilazon, and the Murex trunculus is, in fact, the Chilazon. So this is one of the topics that's debated and discussed. I want to turn now, though, to another topic, which is maybe more that's only tangentially related to our Gemara, but the topic of Zevulun, the tribe of Zevulun, and their portion, that is the central point of our Gemara, and that also is relevant to the debate of whether the Murex trunculus is the Chilazon or not. And that's because as follows. The Gemara here says that the tribe of Zevulun is assured that they're going to get the Chilazon. They're going to have the Chilazon. Now the question is, where did the tribe of Zevulun, what area of Eretz Yisrael did they have? Did they have land along the coast, the Mediterranean coast, or not? So if you look at the psukim in Sefer Yoshua, at the beginning of Sefer Yoshua, actually at the beginning of Perek Yates in chapter 19, so it talks about it describes the portion of the different tribes, including Zevulun, and it's not clear at all from there that they actually have any land along the coast. Nothing explicit there. So, on the other hand, we have that when Yaakov blesses Zevulun, he says, L'chof yamim yishkon. They're going to dwell along the coast, along the sand. So, did they have land on the coast? Did they not? And if they didn't, then why would they have this promise? Don't worry, you're going to have the Chilazon. Why would they have the Chilazon and others not? So Rabbi Reisman, who is one of the opponents of the idea that the Murex Trunculus is the Chilazon, so he has raised questions based on this question, and there's an article that was printed in something called The Voice of Lakewood, and it was written by his son. And his son raised this question as follows. He says, there's a major puzzle, because in Sefer Yoshua, which describes the division of the land, doesn't clearly mention any part of Zevulun's portion as being on the seashore. In fact, he says, Das Sofrim, one of the commentaries, although basically a contemporary commentary, maintains that Zevulun's portion was entirely landlocked. They didn't have access to the sea. Now, if you don't say like that, so you have to say that they had a thin sliver of land that extended west to the Mediterranean. But even if they did have land on the shore, but it wouldn't have been much, others would have had more, how then did Zevulun have a monopoly on the Chilazon if they didn't really have land along the coast? So he says there's three possibilities. He says number one is that Rashi in our Gemara, Rashi on Megillah, he says, Al Yidei Chilazon, Rashi says, Chilazon ola min hayam laharim v'tzoven b'damo tchelas. The Chilazon goes up from the land, from the water to the mountains, and they dye tchelas with it. So, and it's very expensive. So Rashi says it goes, and it's based on a Gemara in Sanhedrin, that it goes from the sea up to the mountains. So that's how it even though they didn't have land along the sea, but it would somehow end up in the mountains, and that's how they would get it. That's one possibility. Second possibility is that if they did have a sliver of land that went to the sea, so then maybe it lived specifically in the area that Zevulun was. Then they were lucky enough to have that area. And the third possibility is, and this is what the Das Sofrim says, because he holds that Zevulun was landlocked, even though they were landlocked, but they were still sailors. I guess, I don't know, they rented dock space or something, and so they were able to get Chilazon at sea, and it was their portion because they were the sailors. Those are the three possibilities he brings up. How could it be that if they didn't have a major portion on the coast, that they still had the monopoly in the Chilazon, either because the Chilazon, like Rashi says here, went up the mountains to them, or it lived mainly where they were, or number three is, meaning they may have had a sliver of land and that's where the Chilazon was mainly found, or number three, they were sailors and they got in the deep sea. Says Rabbi Eliyahu Simcha Reisman, Rabbi Yisrael Reisman's son, that based on this, it seems, in light of all this, it must be that it's not the Murex Trunculus, because that does not fit with any of these possibilities. Number one, it doesn't leave the Mediterranean or Karlat Mountains, so it must, the Murex Trunculus, it must not be that. Number two, it's found all over the Mediterranean shore. It's not limited to one small spot. So if it was only because they had one small spot, it's not limited to that, to any one spot. So that wouldn't give them a monopoly on it either. And finally, you don't need sailors to catch it. It's also found near the shores, and so just because they were the expert sailors, that won't give them a monopoly on it. The Murex Trunculus could be found by the shores. So it must be that the Chilazon is something else. It's not the Murex Trunculus. Those are proofs brought based on trying to identify the location of Shevet Zevulun. Now, the proponents of the idea that the Chilazon is the Murex Trunculus have responses to all of these points. So number one, this Rashi, so that the Chilazon goes up to the mountain, so that may be what Rashi says, and it's based on Gemara and Sanhedrin, but others learn that Gemara and Sanhedrin differently, like the Yad Ramah, one of the other early Rishonim, says it's not talking about the Chilazon. The Chilazon means snail, and it's not talking about, which is itself debated, but this is the very strong claim of the proponents of the Murex that Chilazon means snail, but the Yad Ramah says it's a different. It's not the Tcheles snail; it's a different one, and that's not relevant. Anyways, that's one point. But the but even if you go with that, so that could have been a special nace that it could go up the mountains. Could have been a special nace. Sorry, that's fine. Leave that for now. Additionally, he says that part of the response is that there are many opinions that Zevulun had a significant portion on the coast, and even though the psukim in Yoshua don't mention their borders on the coast, but they had, and this is how the Vilna Gaon says it, that they had, and really Rishonim say this as well. If you look in the commentaries of the Rishonim on the psukim in Sefer Bereshis, the Parshas Vayechi, when Yaakov gives the blessing to the different Shvatim, so he says that Zevulun lechof yamim yishkan, they'll dwell by the coast. So the Rashbam says Shvas Hayam, it's the sea coast, and he says that it's lechof aniyos. It's a place where they can. The pasuk also says there's lechof aniyos. It's where you can dock ships. And so it was a good spot for docking ships for seafaring, so they had land there. So number one, it could be that there are opinions that they did have a significant area on the coast, and so it makes sense that they'd be able to get the Chilazon. Additionally, to the other claim another claim was, well, the Murex trunculus can be found in shallow waters too, so maybe there are some found in shallow waters, but there are much more in the deep waters, and especially if it's being hunted, it's being fished by many people, then the ones in the shallow waters get used up very quickly, and so it is the portion of the sailors to go and get it. So it does make sense that specifically Shevet Zevulun, who were the professional sailors, that they would be the ones to have access to the Murex trunculus, or to if the Chilazon is the Murex trunculus, even though it could be found near the coast in the shallow waters too. And you say you don't need ships, no, but that maybe some can be found, but really it's the bulk of it. If you want to be able to produce it en masse, so then you definitely would need ships to go and get it, and that was, we know, the portion of Zevulun, that they were lechof yamim and lechof aniyos. They had something. It seems they had access to the sea and access to ships. So again, this is a hotly debated topic, and whether and how much portion of the sea, of the sea coast Zevulun had, is an important part of this question. And there's different opinions already going back. You don't have to go back to the recent Das Sofrim who says that Zevulun was landlocked. There are much earlier sources that held that Zevulun was landlocked, but there are also much earlier sources that said that Zevulun had even significant pieces of the sea, and therefore had access to these sea creatures, and therefore it's very possible that the Chilazon that we're talking about here is in fact the Murex trunculus. So this continues to be a debate, and as time goes on, we'll see how everything unfolds.